Apparently, you guys in Germany watch the news a lot, and American and probably Canadian. We don't watch the news as much. I think she meant traditional media. So let's see why that is. I think she immigrated from Germany to America. So God rest her soul. Not the smartest decision, but we're going to give her some slack. America is not that bad, actually, if you have been there. So let's go.
We begin tonight with breaking news. Authorities late today revealing chilling new details.
This is America's most watched evening news broadcast. In fact, it is America's most watched news broadcast, with around 8.2 million people tuning in. Now, at first that might sound like a lot, but then you realize around 340 million people live in the US. Now let's take a look at Germany's most watched news broadcast.
Einen schönen guten Abend. Ich begrüße Sie zur Tagesschau.
This is the Tagesschau. And on average, the Tagesschau reaches more viewers than America's biggest news broadcast. Oh, and keep in mind that compared to the US, only 84 million people live in Germany. That means while 1 in 42 Americans watches ABC World News Tonight, 1 in 9 Germans watches the Tagesschau. I wanted to make a video talking about the differences between German and American news because they're quite different, but then I realized, wait, Americans don't really even watch the news anymore.
Sus.
Instead of just talking about the differences between German and American news, I also wanted to figure out, why do a lot more Germans still watch the news compared to Americans? Where do Americans get their news instead? And also, what does this reveal about the future of news media altogether? So without further ado, let's get into the video. Hi there, my name is Indra. I'm originally from Germany, and over 2 years ago, I moved to the US, where I now live with my American husband, Chandler.
God rest her soul.
News TV works really differently in Germany compared to the US, and we can already see that when we look at how German news television was originally established. One of the two biggest news broadcasters in Germany is the ARD, which was established after World War II. When the war ended, the Allies actually rebuilt Germany's media system to make it harder for government power and information to become controlled in one place. Because under the Nazi regime, media institutions were controlled and used to spread propaganda. So instead of creating one big national broadcaster, the Allies actually helped create a number of regional broadcasters across Germany. In 1950, those regional broadcasters joined together and formed the ARD, which means the ARD isn't a channel in itself, but it's an association of those regional broadcasters. Oh, and just in case you're wondering what ARD stands for, Arbeitsgemeinschaft der öffentlich-rechtlichen Rundfunkanstalten der Bundesrepublik Deutschland. That's also why when you're watching the Tagesschau, it airs on multiple different channels because it is produced by one of the regional broadcasters, but it is distributed across the ARD network. The ARD is one of the two big public broadcasters in Germany. The other one is the ZDF, and because Germans are known for being so creative, ZDF stands for Second German Television, Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen. Both organizations, the ARD and the ZDF, are public broadcasters. They're supposed to inform and educate the public. Therefore, they're also funded by the public. To this day, every German household, with a few exceptions I'm sure, has to pay a mandatory fee toward the funding of those public broadcasters. Of course, Germany also has a number.
I'm wondering if it's also, if the news are known in Germany, like this channel has more bias left-wing, this channel has more bias right-wing, because it's one of the reasons why the traditional media are not as popular anymore, is because they no longer give you the news. They bring their own 2 cents to the news, and it turns people off. So people go to alternative media, especially on the internet, because they just want the news. They don't want all the drama and they don't want your opinion. But it's become extremely biased, so people go away from traditional media, even older people in North America.
Of private broadcasters, which means they make their money like a regular company. And while most of those channels also develop their own news segments, their primary focus has always been entertainment. So in Germany, the two biggest players when it comes to news television are still the ARD and ZDF.
Slay.
While Germany also has private news networks like NTV or Welt, for example, their audience is incredibly small compared to the audience of the ARD and ZDF. So in Germany, we still have a pretty clear separation between the public broadcasters and the news, and the private networks and the entertainment. But American news TV developed a little bit differently. First of all, the US actually also has public broadcasters like NPR and PBS, but unlike the ARD and ZDF in Germany,
Nobody watched
they
this.
never really became the dominant players when it came to television news. And they also receive significantly less funding than the two public broadcasters in Germany. So American news TV was really built around private commercial networks, whether it's CNN or ABC or NBC or MSNBC or Fox News, they're all private companies that
and they all have a political affiliation. That's why I say that it's heavily biased. And you're going to have news, and then 30 minutes after the news, you're going to have a far right-wing commentator talking about a certain topic that was just talked on the news 30 minutes prior. And then the people are just either tuning in for one of the person or the other. But in general, people prefer going to the internet. It's just more like
C or NBC or MSNBC or Fox News,
a bit
they're
less
all
dramatic.
private companies that generate the majority of their revenue through the advertising that they show, and that also makes them competitors in the same market. That's also why there is no American equivalent to the Tagesschau. You can't really be showing the exact same news segment across all of these channels, because they're all competing for attention in order to make money. And as a result, the landscape of American television news is a lot more fragmented than the German one. In the US, the viewers can and have to also choose from a much wider variety of different.
And it's all the same news in America that they will repeat 6 times, but they will have different like political affiliation. So they will push their own narrative while spreading the same news. So it's like you're getting 6 news. It's the same news, but it sounds different on all the different channels.
Different news shows. And what happens when TV news has to compete for attention in order to make money? Well, let's take a look at how the news is being reported in each country.
She's going to see what I'm saying right now.
If you sit down to watch the main evening edition of the Tagesschau in Germany, you will notice one thing very quickly. It's actually very short. The entire segment is only 15 minutes long, airing 7 days a week from 8 to 8:15 p.m. And the stories move very quickly. The presenter doesn't offer any kind of personal commentary. In fact, the presenter is really just a newsreader. They're not
That's
even
what
a
I said.
speaker. They're
That's exactly
literally
the
just
point.
reading you the biggest news of whatever happened in the world that day. So if I had to summarize the purpose of the Tagesschau in one sentence, I would say it's to catch up the audience on the most important events that happened in the world that day in the most efficient way possible. Now, when I compare that to news in the US, when I think of American news TV, I don't actually think of ABC World News Tonight. In fact, I was quite shocked to learn that that is the most watched news segment, because the most famous American news network, I would say,
Fox News.
absolutely has to be
By far.
Fox News.
People will not be surprised to hear that. They suspected it all along.
Now, when it comes to viewership on average, Fox News is the most watched news channel.
Suspected it all.
If you don't know him, his name is Scott Tucker Carlson, and he was literally banned from Fox News because Israel said you're against us, so you need to do your own thing. So they fired him from Fox News, and he started his own like podcast / YouTube, and he's more popular on his own than he ever was on Fox News. And he's probably gonna try to become president in 2028. He's one of the candidates now. So
Along.
Now, when it comes to viewership on average, Fox News is the most watched news channel in the US. It just doesn't have the most popular segment. And those news networks like MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, they face a very different challenge because their main product is news. While the Tagesschau only needs to fill 15 minutes of the most important stories of the day, those cable news networks need to fill an entire day. And that's when the news formats and the reporting style really starts to change. Ultimately, you do need more analysis, more commentary, more opinions, more of whatever it is that keeps the people watching.
But the commentary become the news. The news is a very tiny fragment of Fox News or CNN. And then the people that debate or comment or give you their opinion, they still talk about the news. And it interests people more, this part, the argument, than the actual news that is like unbiased presented before that. And then people go to the internet, and those clips become extremely famous. So even though it's not super popular on traditional media, the internet buzz that these traditional media create on the internet is 20 million times bigger than in Germany. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Spät.
So that is why the whole news environment in the US often feels a lot more personality driven and also opinion driven. This is also where we get into the real issue of audience fragmentation, because what you will notice is that those different news networks in the US also report quite differently on the exact same events.
Donald Trump wins because he told the truth and he listened to the American people.
I don't think he cares about really solving problems except for the most expedient one of not going to jail.
Let's let democracy.
Wow, I love this channel. Everything that I said, exactly that. They will repeat the exact same thing in a different twist because it's not about the news anymore. It's all about politics. So now there's a midterm coming in America in November 2026, right? In a few months. And each channel is going to try to push the news in their own way. And all of them are not telling the truth. Left, right, middle, all of them. Well, there's no left-leaning news media in America. It's only centrist and the right. But they all spin their own narrative because the goal is to win the midterm in November. So the news and politics, we can rename these channels as political news channel because it's all they talk about all day. So
Go, let's put in an all-powerful guy instead, see how it goes.
Unfortunately, over time, what starts to happen is people in the US aren't really consuming the same news anymore because they're spread across all of these different channels that are all reporting on the same events differently. Because of the way that American news channels operate, the US has also developed a highly polarized and highly fragmented news landscape, which means there is very little overlap between the audiences that are watching the different channels. In Germany, the TV news
see what you can see on this graph, and I will put my glasses so you can understand. When you look at the left-leaning, right, Occupy Democrat, the Huffington Post, New York Times, none of them are news channel. They are like a journal. The only one that start to be on the left-leaning is CNN, and CNN is more near the middle. So there's not really like left-wing in America.
Overlap between the audiences that are watching the different channels. In Germany, the TV news landscape is a lot less fragmented, and that also means that people from both ends of the political spectrum are still a lot more likely to consume the same news. In fact,
yeah, in the case of Germany, it means unbiased. In the case of America, if the news is in the middle, it doesn't mean unbiased. It just means that you're part of the establishment. That's just what it means, because there's only two political parties in America. That's why it's so fragmented.
Research has shown that Germans who are on the political left and Germans who are more on the political right still cite the Tagesschau as one of their main news sources. Now, that doesn't actually mean Germans always agree on what's being shown on the news, not at all, but that means Germans are still more likely to draw from the same set of information. Well, in the US, it genuinely feels like people are watching entirely different news. When people are constantly hearing different stories and different interpretations of what is supposed to be the same event, people start to trust the media less altogether.
Side-eye.
And that's exactly what has happened in the US. Well, in the 1970s, trust in the media was still at 70%.
Wow.
It has fallen to under 30%. And now, to be fair, trust in the media has also declined in Germany, but that is happening significantly slower compared to the US. And over the years, the public broadcasters, ARD and ZDF, also have faced a lot of criticism for their news coverage at times. And that is probably an entirely separate video, but I just want to point out that yes, this is also happening.
One other thing that she did not mentioning is that the people that watch one channel in America, they don't watch others. They stick to one. They stick to CNN or they stick to Fox News, and they don't go to other media to get different information. So, for example, Fox News, they will bring on their show, on their debate opinion, people from the internet, like podcaster, political commentator, and then the people that watch Fox News will look at them and then they will seek them on the internet. So it's kind of a funnel of information, but they will only stay within the funnel which fit Fox News narrative, and they're never going to go outside of it. The same for CNN, etc. So these traditional media radicalize people. That's what I'm trying to say. Because people start there, they see people that they bring on Fox News, and then it funnels them into even more extreme opinion online. That's the funnel. And that's why American media, even though less people watch traditional, if you take overall, it's massive, and the impact is massive, especially on the internet.
Germany, but it is happening a lot slower. And I don't think that's a coincidence. But there is a thing that happens when people stop trusting in the news. They stop watching the news.
What happened when people stop watching the news?
So does
Nothing.
that mean Americans are just no longer staying informed? No, that just means Americans have started getting their information elsewhere. Because for the first time ever in the US, social media has actually surpassed TV as the source of news. So more Americans now get their news from platforms like X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, instead of traditional
Twitch.
news television. People are getting their news from podcasters, YouTubers, independent commentators, or influencers. Now, I would say that's not purely a negative development because it definitely
Yeah, but she should mention that this is only possible because the traditional news bring those people on their news broadcast on television, and then people see new faces and then to go seek them on the internet. It's a team. They work together. The traditional and the internet, they work together.
democratizes the access to news and information, but it does create another problem. Because if you thought that the American TV news landscape had already fragmented audiences, social media and social media commentators are fragmenting audiences into millions. But on top of that, on social media, you're also existing within a highly individualized algorithm. And Germany is moving in the same direction, even though it's happening a lot slower, but younger audiences are also starting to get more and more of their news
This is
and
the
information
TikTok
from
funnel
social media.
that is
I will
also
say that
on
this
YouTube.
Tagesschau has, in my opinion, done a pretty good job of also showing up on social media.
6-7. Crash out.
And while the main edition of the Tagesschau is still remaining very factual and objective, not that you can ever be 100% objective, that is, I think, purely impossible because we're human, but they are reporting differently according to the platform that they're showing up on. I do really think that those different developments and how many Germans still watch and also trust the same news source as compared to Americans really shows that German public broadcasting has been very resilient and a lot more resilient than their American counterparts. That doesn't mean German broadcasting hasn't faced its fair share of criticism in recent years, but I do think the greater resilience of public broadcasting in Germany is a combination of the societal expectation of how news should be consumed and presented, and also the institutional commitment through public funding and the fact that news is still seen as a public service and a source of information and not necessarily a source of opinion.
What?
Now, in the US, it does seem like news,
That's
especially
Linda
news
Ingram.
television, has always been a bit
She's
more
insane.
of a product, ultimately also designed by competing companies to keep the most amount of people watching for the longest amount of time to make the most amount of money, which means the news itself has started to look very different according to the channel that people are watching, which has ultimately just eroded the trust in all news media altogether. So I think an important question to conclude this with is, are we still consuming enough of the same factual information in order to have respectful discussions and respectfully disagree with people on an issue? Or, I mean, quite frankly, are we already getting to a point, or are we already at a point, especially in the US, where we're consuming such highly individualized, but also polarized and potentially altered information that it starts to feel like we're no longer living in the same reality at all? And really, what does that mean for society going forward? I realize this sounds quite dramatic. It's not necessarily a very encouraging note to end on, but it's definitely
she's right.
Something I think that is worth thinking about. I would love to know, are you still watching the news? And if
For someone who's been in the US only 2 years, she understands really, really well, because a lot of the point that I brought up, she literally said it right after. She's really smart. 2 years in the US and she understands all of that already. Maybe she was already consuming a lot of American politics before that, because I live in Thailand for a long time now. I'm Canadian and I watch a lot of American news. Although it's all from my favorite like streamer and podcaster, I don't really watch traditional news. I watch it from the eyes of other people so I can get their opinion. And where America is heading is absolutely insane. But I think a lot of that buzz will end once Trump is no longer in power. I think he was kind of an outlier, and whoever is coming after is going to be a Democrat probably. We're all going to come down to planet Earth. the racism, all of that discrimination. I think it was very specific to Trump. I think we are entering a much better era really soon after 2028. And in Germany, you guys seem to be going backwards. I think it's the Merz government right now that you guys hate. It seemed like in Germany, you guys changed government a lot and it never worked out. And you guys have a lot of political party. I was always under the impression that you need more party in America. Like you need more option. You're going to make people accountable, right? Because when the two parties sucks, you still need to vote for one of them. And in Germany, you have so many party. You can vote for the one you want, even if it's a smaller one, and maybe the smaller one can win. But it seemed like it doesn't really happen like this. So anyway, thank you for watching, guys.